It was a long time ago, 35 years ago, but I'd been kind of sent to China to cover or to try and sort of make sense of what was going on as I think the General Secretary of the Communist Party, Hu Yaobang, had died of a heart attack, and he was, the one person in the leadership who was sympathetic to the students, and so they came with a kind of wreath and placed it in Tiananmen Square, and anyway, it led to a sort of grievance movement which they'd experienced before. So we thought, in Magnum, that this would be kind of important because they didn't leave the square, having got there on, I think it was April the 17th, 1989. And gradually more people arrived, and, the students sort of whose main problem was really to do with corruption, not democracy. They'd never had any experience of that. But an awful lot of corruption in the higher echelons, in the military and the political side. And so I got sent to Beijing because, I was at that time doing an awful lot of breaking news. That's what I did. I didn't have a problem flying in somewhere and photographing. And so I found somewhere to stay as close as I could to what was the kind of epicenter of the story, Tiananmen Square. I spent about 10 days in Beijing. I think I flew on 24th, 25th of May. And I sort of followed the students. I had a bicycle. I was taken to the university to show the printing presses. I think on the 30th of May, martial law was declared, or one form or another of it. And then on the sort of couple of days later, the 80,000 troops arrived from all over China, and suddenly the streets are full of soldiers. People felt scared, intimidated, and the sort of the temperature sort of rose, generally speaking, as students became more defiant. And then we got to the night of the 3rd, 4th of June, where there was a crackdown, not just in the square, but around the square, where a lot of people were killed. We don't know how many. And I was in the square. It was June, so the day was quite long, daylight. But as it got dark, it was kind of scary because you didn't know where the shooting was coming from. There was quite a lot of shooting around the edge of the square. I saw people sort of running towards me, covered in blood. I saw an APC, an armoured personnel carrier, on fire. There was a wounded soldier as well, being carried through the crowd. I saw somebody go down behind me. And there was a certain point, and I was with another photographer, Charlie Cole, who sadly passed away now, and he couldn't get back to his hotel, which is on the western side of the square, which was where all the shooting was. He couldn't get through there. It was an awful lot. And so I said, well, he could stay in my room in my hotel, which was down on the eastern side of Chang'an Avenue. So at some point, I guess it was like midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, I can't remember when, we got back to the hotel. The hotel had been taken over by the sort of military or people like security people, and they were like going through bags, and we managed to get to the room without having our stuff taken, confiscated. But then they were going from room to room looking for cameras. Anyway, at some point, fairly soon, we went to sleep, woke up early and looked out the window, and there was quite a lot of tank movement, or just, no, not tank movement, I can't remember, just sort of movement on the street. And And so we thought what we wanted to do is get a decent view from the balcony. So this was the morning of the 4th. Get a decent view of the balcony. So we went up, and on the floor above, or 2 floors above, there was a French TV crew, and they let us shoot from their balcony. But we had to go quite low, because by about 10 or 11, they were shooting over the heads of people that were lined up down the street, and shooting at them too. About 30 of them were killed, apparently. And so there were kind of bullets bouncing off the buildings. Excuse me. And we sort of stayed, Charlie and I, sort of down low. I think at one point I had to borrow one of his long lenses. We were sort of swapping stuff. And then the guy, the tanks broke through the ranks of soldiers and bystanders at the end of the road. There were probably, I don't know how many there were anyway, but broke through, and a group of 4 or 5 tanks started driving up the road. Now I've got the whole series. I've got the square, the tanks coming through, the whole chronology, which we, Magnum put together as a kind of contact sheet of the chronology, so you can see what happened. And then a guy came out of the crowd from our side of the street and started remonstrating with the tank driver. Then he climbed up onto the tank, continued remonstrating with the driver, and then he went back down again, and then 2 or 3 people from the crowd came and took him to the other side of the road. That's the last we've heard of him. So that, in short, in a nutshell, there's obviously much more to say than that, is kind of how we saw it. So we just stayed the night in the hotel. We woke up, and we saw these ranks of soldiers and sort of tanks, and there were helicopters resupplying the troops landing in the square. And eventually, as I say, the tanks broke through the file of bystanders, and I suspect that the guy who was remonstrating in front of the tank was somebody who might have had a relative who was missing, and because no one got any word. Don't forget, the Chinese have never listed the dead or reached out to any of the relatives of the dead. This is one of the big issues in China, that this has never happened, and there's never been any public apology or closure, where, people just didn't come home. You imagine that if you're somebody's mum or dad,
How did it feel on that balcony?
It felt, and I've written about this several times, like I was too far away. I think we were always taught, if your picture's not good enough, you're not close enough. And I'd had memories, of people and tanks from from Prague, from Kudelka's work. So I was very aware of what I should be getting, but couldn't, because we couldn't leave the hotel. So it felt very far away, and in fact, I don't think anybody would have published the pictures had George Bush, Senior this is, not seen it on television in Kennebunkport in Maine and said publicly, oh, this is an extraordinary moment, this is the most incredible moment, and of course what it enabled him to do with the Senate was to carry on business as usual with the Chinese by arguing that it showed restraint. They didn't run him over, they didn't kill him, and so on. So some pictures that are described as iconic are often described that way for a particular reason, and normally a political one. Very often one of aesthetic excellence. I thought it was like pretty second rank, actually, compared to other pictures I took in China at the time. The day after, I think it was the 5th, the Monday, I got this call from our Paris office saying, oh, did you get it? And I said, what? And they said, oh, this picture of the tank. And then they needed it, because everybody was asking for it. But the pictures they were publishing straight afterwards were of the crushed Chinese people and crushed bicycles. That was the story. And this picture that came out a couple of days later kind of overlaid in the kind of iconography of Tiananmen Square the ranking, in the ranking of images. So it sort of infected the public memory and imagination of the event, which of course suited, as I say, the Republicans in the Senate and of course the Chinese, because it was, although they said they'd banned the picture, you could still buy my book, The Documentary Impulse, in bookshops in Beijing with that picture printed in it. And I wrapped mine in a box of tea that I don't know why I had some tea, but I had a box of tea, and then I gave it to one of these sort of interns who were working with Entendeur, the French TV, and she took it back to Beijing, back to Paris. But it wasn't published until 17th, 18th of June, way later, might even have been in 20th of June. Neither mine nor Charlie's. And the other guy, the guy from AP, I don't think he was published for a couple of days either, because I think he had really bad flu, and he tried to get into the darkroom which was next to the embassy or give the film to the Marines who were guarding the embassy, and they forgot about it and they didn't give the film until the day later, which I think is why people have continued the myth of the fact that it was on the 5th of June that the tank thing happened, but it actually happened the morning after the crackdown.